Welcome to Amazing Stories. I hope you're ready for a new and incredible story. What if I told you that the Third Reich wasn't just a political and military machine, but also a drug machine? That behind every perfect march, every wild speech and every quick victory, there were drugs. Germany didn't just make weapons, it made drugged soldiers, it made leaders who were not themselves, it made people obey using chemicals, Pervitin, morphine, cocaine, secret shots, pills handed out like candy. The Nazi army didn't just run on hate and propaganda, it ran on meth. While the world saw them as disciplined, they were actually dependent on drugs. While people talked about their strength, what was hidden was a fake kind of toughness, kept up by uppers, made to get rid of fear, pain, and even sleep. This is the story of the most drugged army of the 1900s, and no one has told it to you like this. For years, pictures from the war showed soldiers marching strong, tanks rolling without stopping, and powerful speeches. But there was something they never showed, something that held it all together from the inside. How did that army keep going when their bodies couldn't take it anymore? Under every uniform, inside every pocket, there was something more than bullets. There were pills, little bottles, shots, special mixes made not to heal but to force. To turn human bodies into useful parts, able to fight off fear, pain, and sleep without stopping. And it wasn't just the soldiers, the drugs also went around among the leaders. While orders were given, kill orders were signed, and attacks were planned, someone was passing around another dose. Not for health, but because they needed it to operate. This drug use wasn't just here and there, it was a routine, a planned thing, quiet but widespread. How big was the real effect of meth, morphine and cocaine on how the Third Reich worked? The pill that changed the war. Before the war even started, Germany already had a drug. This drug promised to get rid of tiredness, make people feel better, and let anyone keep going without sleep. It was called Pervitin. It was a white pill, shaped like a hexagon, and it had pure methamphetamine inside. At first, they sold it freely in drugstores. You didn't need a doctor's note, there were no laws against it, and it didn't seem dangerous. They advertised it as a modern fix for long days, when your mind was worried and for feeling tired every day. The company that made it, Temmler, was a lab in Berlin. They focused on making medicines that gave you energy. In the late 1930s, one of their chemists, Fritz Hauschild, looked at studies from Japan about methamphetamines. He then changed them to fit what people in Germany wanted. Pretty soon, Pervitin showed up in newspaper ads. They said it was a perfect helper for students, office workers, drivers, doctors, and homemakers. The ads said that with just one pill you could fight off tiredness and sadness, do more work, and always stay alert. In the winter of 1938, the first shipments arrived at drugstores all over the country. The effects happened right away. People felt a lot of energy, clear thoughts, and a happy, excited feeling. Many didn't know it was a drug called methamphetamine. For them, it was just a strong vitamin. It was even sold in chocolate candies that college students bought to study longer before their tests. The product got so popular that thousands of people used it every day without knowing about the risks. As Pervitin became more popular, some doctors started to notice side effects, not being able to sleep, shaking, mood changes, and feeling extremely tired after the happy feeling wore off. But there weren't many warnings. Most doctors, even those in the army, thought the good things were more important than the bad things, especially at a time when getting a lot done was seen as a great thing for the country. Around that same time, the German army was getting ready for a fast war. The new ways of fighting needed speed, constant movement, and soldiers who could keep going for days without rest. The idea of using a drug to keep a whole army awake and active didn't seem like such a wild idea. That's when the top leaders started to try out using Pervitin with soldiers who were training. In March of 1939, just before they invaded Poland, the first shipments of Pervitin were approved to go straight to the tank divisions. They handed out boxes with thousands of pills. Each one was marked with simple instructions. Take one when the day starts and another if you feel tired. The results surprised the officers. The soldiers stayed alert. They walked more than 50 kilometers, that's about 30 miles, without showing they were tired, and they followed orders without complaining. The Army's medical command, led by Dr. Otto Ranke, decided to study the real effects of the drug in battle conditions. He organized a series of tests with volunteer soldiers. They measured how fast they reacted, how long they could last physically, and how they made decisions. In all cases, the results were good. Ranke figured out that Pervitin could help soldiers do better during tough military campaigns. That conclusion was the green light for the medicine to be given out in large amounts to foot soldiers, units with vehicles and fighter pilots. When the attack on Poland started, the soldiers already had the pills with them. Some reports tell how they traveled long distances without sleep, eating very little, and stayed fully ready for action for days. They could still react fast, they stayed excited, and it felt like they weren't tired at all. What people said later agreed that many felt invincible, as if nothing could stop them. Meanwhile, people started showing signs they couldn't stop taking it. They got nervous, shaky, saw things that weren't real, and sometimes they'd just pass out after days with no real sleep. By then, lots of regular folks were using Pervitin too. Sales in drugstores kept going up. Factory workers, especially in Berlin, used it to work double shifts. Women doing housework took it to help them get through their daily chores. Even some writers and artists said they used it to keep their ideas flowing. No one was talking about addiction yet. People still thought the drug was a sign of how advanced medicine was in the new Germany. Even Nazi propaganda knew Pervitin was valuable. Some secret papers mentioned it as an example of how science was moving forward. Meanwhile, the Temler lab was making much more of it to supply both regular people and the army. By 1940, they were already making millions of pills every month. Some kinds had caffeine to make them work even better. Others were sold like special drinks to make you feel new again. It was all legal, and the health people said it was okay. In the weeks before they invaded France, the German army gave out over 35 million pills to the soldiers who were going to fight. The lightning war, as they called it, needed soldiers who just wouldn't stop. The attack plans needed them to keep moving all the time, even at night, and to feel really good about fighting. Pervitin seemed like the perfect thing to make that happen. In the first few days of the attack, the soldiers crossed Belgium and Holland super fast. They went through forests, rivers and towns super fast, much faster than usual. The leaders couldn't figure out how they kept up all that energy without really stopping to rest, but the pills were right there in every pocket, in every backpack. What started as just a little helper had become a big part of how the army worked. The drug was like another part of the German war machine. As the tanks rolled forward and the enemy lines broke, not many people knew that a lot of that power came from something tiny and unseen, but super strong. The story of that pill was just getting started. What these pills really did and the problems they caused would be felt way beyond the fighting. An army that didn't sleep, Blitzkrieg and drugs on the move. When Hitler planned how to take over Europe, he knew fast tanks and eager officers weren't enough. He needed something more, something to push soldiers past what humans can normally do. That's how the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, started. It was a way to attack super fast, without stopping, without going back. For this to work, they had to get rid of one main problem, being tired, and to do that, they used pills. Methamphetamines became like the secret fuel for their attacks. Pervitin especially started to be seen not as medicine, but as a weapon for war. They gave it out in huge amounts. Thousands of soldiers carried it in their backpacks with their bullets and food. Soon it was just a normal part of their gear, a chemical helper to stay awake, move at night, and not feel so tired. The fight in Poland was the first try. It worked. In just 28 days, the German army took over the whole country. The soldiers kept moving without stopping, like waves coming one after another, as if they never needed to sleep. That's when the top leaders realized Pervitin wasn't just a sometimes helper. It was part of the plan. Before the attack on France, they gave out over 35 million pills to tank crews, pilots, and foot soldiers. The idea was to keep up the speed, not to waste even an hour resting. One commander told how his group traveled 300 kilometers in just 3 days, with the drivers taking 2 to 5 pills every day. The trucks kept going even at night, led by soldiers who didn't even blink. Some only ate 1 chocolate bar a day. They didn't feel hungry, they didn't feel scared, just a need to keep moving forward. Dr. Otto Ranke, the head doctor for the army, was one of the people who pushed for using so much of it. He said the stuff helped keep their spirits up, made them focus better, and let them do hard jobs without stopping. Many top officers asked him for these chemical supplies directly. Ranke wrote everything down in his diary. Pervitin was such a normal part of the soldiers' days that they gave it out before every big mission with clear instructions. Use it so you don't sleep. The result was a lot of quick and terrible wins. The Panzer tank groups moved like a wave that couldn't be stopped. They went through fields, woods and towns without slowing down. Lots of times they got to cities before the enemy could even get ready to fight. Some French army posts were taken without a single shot fired. They were so surprised by how fast the Germans were moving. Some people thought the Germans could go on forever, that they never rested, and they weren't totally wrong, but feeling so great had a cost. After days without sleep, many soldiers just collapsed. They fell to the ground with no strength, unable to get up. Some started seeing things that weren't there. Others got shaky or confused. The good feelings from the meth would suddenly go away, and all that was left was a super tired, thirsty, shaky body. Sometimes they needed whole days to feel better. It was like they'd been hit by a sickness you couldn't see. Getting the pills to the soldiers was also really important. If a group of soldiers ran out of pills, they couldn't do their job well at all. Sometimes when soldiers didn't get their pills, they got really worried, had panic attacks, suddenly got violent, threw up, or even started believing things that weren't true. The army tried to control who got the pills, but it was hard. In some camps, a little secret market for them even started. Pills were traded for cigarettes, food, or favors. Needing the drug wasn't just an idea anymore, it was a real problem. In the first few months, you couldn't argue with the results. The attacks worked, everyone felt good, and the soldiers felt like they couldn't be beaten. But after a while, doctors started to see some worrying things. Higher blood pressure, heart attacks, not being able to sleep for a long time. Several important officers fainted and some died. A colonel died while swimming after taking too many pills. A top general fainted while driving to the battle after taking several pills. Even so, things didn't stop. The army leaders cared more about speed than about health. The fights in 1941 kept going the same way, marching without rest, long work shifts, soldiers staying awake for more than 70 hours. In the big, important battles like the attack on Western France, methamphetamine was super important again. The Allies couldn't figure out how they moved so far so fast. Even Winston Churchill was confused by how fast the German tanks were. He didn't get how they could keep going without stopping, without getting more supplies and still be strong for every fight. But it wasn't just good plans, it was chemicals. The real power behind those attacks wasn't the tank engines, it was the pills. The French, on the other hand, didn't have anything like it. They moved at a normal speed up. Their soldiers did things like normal people. Eat, sleep, wait for orders. That really hurt them. The German army got places before news about them even arrived. By the time a town knew the enemy was coming, it was too late. The Germans were already there. One French report said it felt like everyone was seeing things that weren't real. Their soldiers were beaten not just in the fighting, but in their minds too. The enemy seemed to be everywhere. You couldn't guess what they'd do. It didn't make any sense. They didn't follow any rules, they didn't take breaks, they just didn't stop. The war became a mind game, and in that game, methamphetamine was the secret weapon. The German soldiers weren't just trained, they were changed. Their senses, how long they could last, how they saw time. Everything was affected by a drug that changed what was real. And even though many didn't know what they were taking, they took it anyway. It was part of their daily life, part of their uniform, part of the war. The Blitzkrieg couldn't have kept going without that chemical help. It wouldn't have been so fast, so good, so deadly. The idea of the soldier who couldn't be stopped was very real. It wasn't about magic or being super disciplined. It was about the pills, how they worked, and getting results that weren't natural. And even though the bad side effects got worse later, at that time all that mattered was moving forward. Sleep could wait. The business of energy pills, making tons of Pervitin. In Nazi Germany, science labs weren't just for medical research. They became like another arm of the government. One of the biggest was Temmler, a company not many people knew about, but in just a few years it was right in the middle of the war effort. That's where they made Pervitin, the pill that fueled millions of soldiers and regular people. But what most didn't know was that the companies making this drug worked just like the factories making guns, all for the war. The story starts in Berlin. A chemist named Fritz Hausfeld took some Japanese studies about methamphetamine and made a German kind. It was in 1937 that the Temmler company got a patent for Pervitin. The drug came in small pills that were easy to make, give out and take. Right from the start, they had two goals: to sell it to regular people and, at the same time, have something helpful for the army if they needed it. It grew really fast. At the start of 1938, they started putting ads all over Germany. On streetcars, in train stations, and even in newspapers, you'd see ads saying Pervitin was the perfect answer for being tired, sad, or not getting much done. The doctors got letters with free samples and were told to try it and tell their patients about it. The plan was simple: get people to want it from the ground up so society would start using it without the government having to order them to. They started making a lot more of it. Temmler hired more people, made their factories bigger, and made their production lines work better. The product didn't need any strange stuff or special machines. They could make a lot of it with things they could easily get in the country. This was perfect for a country getting ready for war and trying to buy less from other places. Pervitin was so successful, it started a trend. Other German drug companies like Temmler and Merck also got interested in these energy pills. Some made similar things, others just sold or changed the original Pervitin, but Temmler was ahead. They were the army's favorite supplier and had the quiet support of the government. The bosses at Temmler knew they were in the right business at the right time. When the war started, the drug companies and the army got even closer. The army started ordering huge amounts of Pervitin. The pills were put in sealed boxes with simple instructions on the label and sent by train to where the fighting was. For every battle, the medicine went along with the guns and food. It became a normal part of their gear. In 1940, the orders were so big that Temmler had to have people working all day and night in 3 shifts. Every month, they were making millions of pills. The factories got even bigger. They made some work automatic, opened new factories, and trained people really fast, all for one reason: to keep Germany awake, working hard, and moving forward. But it wasn't just soldiers using Pervitin. People in charge in regular jobs also encouraged workers to use it. In factories, post offices, and hospitals, the pills were passed around like it was normal. It wasn't weird to see boxes of them on bosses' desks or for people working at night to share a dose before starting. It became an everyday thing. People took it to do more work, to stay awake, to handle stress. It was legal, cheap, and most importantly, the government allowed it. They even put it in chocolates. Hildebrand chocolates filled with methamphetamine were sold in small shops and were popular with homemakers and students. There were no warnings on them and no age limits to buy them. People thought of them as a modern thing, part of the country's science getting better. The government clearly supported it. Even though they never had official ads for it, the top party leaders knew how much Pervitin was helping. Some secret reports from the propaganda ministry called the drug a helpful support for the country's efforts. They talked about it like a drug for everyone, a way to get people to work better without forcing them. It wasn't just about controlling bodies, but also about shaping what people wanted to do. It was a strange situation. The government said drugs were bad, but they pushed these energy pills to control people. The methamphetamine factories worked non-stop, with the government protecting them. In 1941, doctors warned about the bad side effects, but money and the military were more important. Because there weren't many rules, secret markets and stealing started. Temmler kept making the pills, even when bombs were falling. Hitler relied on daily shots from his doctor, Theodor Morell, who gave him methamphetamines, cocaine, hormones, and strong painkillers. Over time, he got more and more of these drugs, and it affected his body and his mind. People close to him saw the changes, but Hitler trusted Morell completely. During the war, he got shots more often because they said it was needed to keep the leader active. Hitler had shaking, sweating, couldn't sleep, and his moods changed a lot. After someone tried to kill him in 1944, Morell tried using a special kind of penicillin on him. In the last months of the government, he got shots every day, many times a day. Morell's records showed he was giving Hitler treatments without any real plan, just a mix of different drugs. People who study history agree that Hitler became more and more dependent on these chemicals. His mind got worse, he became paranoid and believed things that weren't true. Morell kept giving him shots until right before Hitler killed himself. Hermann Göring, another Nazi leader, had been fighting a morphine addiction since 1923. Being dependent on it made him weak and hurt his name. He tried to stop using morphine many times, but he always went back to it. When he was caught in 1945, he had thousands of pills with him. You could see how the addiction affected his body and how he acted. During the Nuremberg trials, they told everyone about his addiction. While Germany was making drugs for its army, the concentration camps became places to test drugs on prisoners. They tried mixes of methamphetamines, strong painkillers, and cocaine. In a camp called Sachsenhausen, they tested a drug called D-Ein. It made weak prisoners able to walk for very long ways without resting. These tests were to try and make soldiers who could fight without sleep, food, or fear. They tested on prisoners who were cold, hungry, and under terrible stress. The Air Force and submarine crews also took part in these tests. The tests were done in secret, and the doctors said they had to do it to win the war. In 1945, when Germany was losing badly, the Air Force made a group called the Leonidas Squadron. It was a group of German pilots who were supposed to die on their missions. The pilots were young and didn't have much experience. They were given methamphetamine, cocaine, and other drugs to stop them from feeling scared. Their job was to crash their planes into Allied bomber planes. The first attack didn't work, but Nazi news made it sound like they were heroes. Records show that drugs were a big part of these missions. Drug use also spread to the top Nazi leaders. Pervitin was passed around in the SS, and leaders like Himmler took different chemical pills. They used cocaine in nose drops before questioning people or going into fights. At private parties for some big bosses, they served drinks with stimulants in them. What they said in public and what they did in private was very different. In the last months of the war, needing chemicals got even worse. It felt like drugs were needed just to keep going. Hospitals near the fighting gave out morphine and methamphetamine without any real control. The drug use in Nazi Germany was a total mess of chemicals that helped bring about its end. The main goal wasn't to make soldiers better, but to keep them fighting for as long as they could. On the Eastern Front, they fought without stopping, getting drugs right on the battlefield. When they ran out of supplies, they used whatever drugs they could find. The cold, hunger, and fear were too much for the men, and pills were the only thing that kept them moving. In Berlin, the top leaders, including Hitler, were taking more and more drugs. Hitler was still getting many different drugs every day from Morell. Even though he was getting physically worse, he kept making decisions. Morell made sure he didn't have any bad feelings from stopping the drugs. Göring had collected thousands of paracodin pills and took them because he was anxious. In other places, generals gave energy pills to soldiers before battles. The soldiers would fight with wild energy, not listening to orders, and then they would just fall down. In schools for young soldiers, boys as young as 15 were given drugs before being sent to fight in hopeless situations. Using these drugs spread to offices and factories. There was no main control, and the secret market for them grew. Needles were shared without being cleaned. Soldiers couldn't tell anymore if they were feeling the drug or just tired. There were times when people went crazy, saw things, or got very angry. Some shot their own men or ran right into enemy gunfire. Many died from taking too much or from being too tired. Doctors tried to stop it, but they didn't have the stuff or the power. The last weeks of Nazi Germany were a chemical mess. Using drugs went from being a plan to being something they did out of desperation. In his bunker in Berlin, Hitler kept getting shots until right before he killed himself. After Germany gave up, the Allies found storerooms with millions of pills and papers about drug tests. It was strange. They were saying the crimes were bad, but at the same time, they wanted to learn from what the Nazis found. The US Army, in something called Operation Paperclip, hired Nazi scientists. They studied the recipes for energy drugs, and this affected how military drugs were made during the Cold War. In Europe, they took away big shipments of Pervitin. During the Nuremberg trials, they talked about how using drugs was a government plan. Drug companies looked at the Nazi chemicals. Methamphetamine and oxycodone, which were made in Germany, were still used, but with more rules and bad results. Another thing that lasted was the idea of using drugs to control people. The Nazi idea of using drugs to make people work better was copied by other countries for their armies. In Germany, it took a long time for people to get off the drugs, and the problems from so many people using them because the government allowed it lasted for a while. New studies have shown how much drugs were used in Nazi Germany. The book Blitzkrieg, written by Norman Ohler, showed how these drugs were a big part of the military. The drug companies that worked with the Nazis were also looked into. They studied Dr. Morell's case to understand what mixes of drugs he was using. The bad things left behind by Nazi Germany include these chemical marks and learning about how drugs and power can be connected. The story we've looked at today is definitely an amazing story, but it's also a warning, a serious reminder of how science, if bad people use it, can become a way to hurt others, and how wanting power too much can make us lose what makes us human. Let this story help us remember that being truly great doesn't come from changing our minds with drugs, but from being good, kind, and respecting life. Because in the end, history shows us that the most amazing thing is that people can choose to do good instead of bad. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I hope you had a good time, and like always, any ideas you have are welcome. Until the next amazing story, don't forget to leave a like,